Hello, Paul Hamilton here. We've got a little tutorial. What we're going to do, I'll just make this a little bit bigger, 3/4 size. So we're going to make this kind of gecko based on kind of the color palette from Mad Max. A little bit weird, but what we're also going to do is we're going to use this Keynote gecko lizard as a template, and we're going to color it using some really great brushes in Procreate, but we're also going to do some modifications to make it a little bit more unique and kind of play around a little bit with some of the effects in it. So let's get started. I'm pretty new to Procreate, to be honest. I'm familiar with Keynote, so just bear with me as I go along here. What I'm going to do basically is I'm just going to change. I'll have a look at here. I'm just going to change my background if I can quickly to a black background, and I'm going to drag on a split screen my gecko over into Procreate. You can see it's come over. It's so easy to do. And then I'm just going to shut down this split screen just so that you can see it a little bit better, and we'll work from there. Now you can see at the top I've got on my kind of move tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some coloring. So at the top you'll see a little select tool, see right up the top there, and I'm going to tap my gecko. Now what I'm going to do now is hit on my paintbrush on the side here, and you can see it goes white again. And I've gone to basically organic and clay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to color this in a little bit. So here I've got my opacity, so I'll set that down a little bit. Brush size I'll just bring up a little bit. And over at the colors here, I'm just using these colors that I found from the movie palette, and I'm just going to have a little bit of a play around with them and see how I go. So basically I'm just going to go over. Now you can see with my layers here, this is on layer 1, and I'm just going to do some really kind of rough edges here with my clay tool, which I think it suits the gecko really, really well. And I'm just going to start playing with and layering some different palettes as I kind of go along. You can see it's got that beautiful texture as I go along. And I'm just doing this really in a random kind of fashion in regard to the colors. I'll get a little bit of light in there as well as I go along. And then once I've got a bit of a covering of my gecko, because I kind of want it that kind of dark kind of aspect of it, once I've got a decent cover, I'm going to just bring out the highlights a little bit by increasing my opacity a little bit there. I'll just make that a little bit darker. And so I've got a pretty good coverage there as I go along. And so what I'm going to do now is just keep that brush size about the same, but I'm going to increase the opacity just so that I've got a little bit more definition. You can see there that I'm starting to kind of just increase a little bit my aspects. And the great thing about selection is I don't need to stay inside the actual lines, because it's just kind of doing the bits that I want it to do there. So I'm just kind of filling in the gaps there, and it's kind of looking pretty great. Need some kind of dark aspects there just to bring it together a little bit. And we'll put in a little bit of brown here. That's looking pretty good. You can kind of play around with the colors and so forth as you go along. But basically you can see there that I'm going pretty well. I've got some different aspects here as I go along. So that's pretty good. We'll keep it there because I wanted to show you some of the other effects. So we want to change the kind of template of this. So I'm going to hit the adjustments at the top there and start to have a look at the different things we can do. So we can do some noise if we like. We could do some liquefying, which we'll do here. And we'll just make some things. So we'll go with a push and just drag a little bit. You can see there that's kind of pushing it around a little bit in regard to the effects, which is pretty cool. And we can kind of do things like pinches, making big and small. But you can see here at the top, if I go back, you can see that if I reset it up the top, if we just get off the select tool and now go to it, we can actually start to play around with some different things here. So if I go to push now, it's kind of pushing the whole aspect over it, and I can start to make him a bit fatter if I wanted to. Give him a bit of personality, kind of move him around a little bit, make that kind of come out a little bit. Let's do some kind of twirls. We can kind of twirl it a little bit so he's turning to the left or right. and we can kind of twirl. That one doesn't look great, so we'll bring it back a little bit. We'll just move him around, kind of push that out a little bit, and you can start to see that you can start to kind of play around with the aspects of your gecko. So we'll bring that down a little bit, make him a little bit fatter, and it looks like he's kind of doing some different things. We can do some things like expand if we wanted to. You can kind of pinch things to make things a little bit smaller. And all of a sudden you're starting to play around with the different aspects of it. So if I actually finish that, if I actually go up here and I turn my background off, you can kind of see he's a bit distorted there and he's a bit funny looking, but you can start to play around with the different effects and the different things. And so if I just kind of go there and I actually share that as a PNG, and I copy that, if I jump into Keynote, you can start to see the different things that we're playing. That's probably a better version of what we had. This one's going to look a little bit dodgier here as we go through, a little bit fatter and a little bit on the side, but you can start to play around with things. But you can see how it changes in regard to the different aspects as we start to play around with color palettes. You can see the colors on my first one here is a little bit better. But I always find having colour palettes to play with and looking at kind of earthy colours in regard to these things kind of helps a little bit as you go along. Not the most perfect tutorial in the world, but it's just a way of getting you started, starting to use Keynote shapes and dragging into a split screen with Procreate and kind of using that template, if you like, as a starting point from going forward. Paul Hamilton here, signing off.